Netanyahu is finished. A lot of people are saying this is important to know because the insiders in Israel, pretty much all the people have said Netanyahu is finished, that they're done with him. They want him out. The people are angry as hell. And the thing is, though, is they're saying he's finished after the war. So a lot of people who are worried about this breaking out into a wider war, people worried about this being another endless war that we're going to have to be funding. You have a good reason to worry about this because what is Netanyahu going to do if everything he's hearing is Netanyahu is done, his political career is over, he's finished after the war? He's going to make sure there's no after the war, that the war just goes on and on and on and on and on, so that he could stay in power for as long as possible. So this is very, very dangerous. Let's just show you some of these headlines right here. These are coming from Israel. It's insiders from Israel, but here's survivors of kibbutz attack turn their ire on Netanyahu. This is a Politico piece saying that a massive security failure and antagonism towards Palestinians means many Israelis think Netanyahu has to answer for Hamas's attack. So a lot of these people this is a piece of the people who were attacked. They're actually in the hospital recovering from their injuries. Their friends, their family members, their children were killed, and they are pointing the blame at Netanyahu. They're saying he is responsible for this because he did not come to a political solution with the Palestinians. He continued to aggravate the situation, and he needs to go. And he's not saying, I'm sorry I failed you. I'm sorry about that. This is part of the piece here. Let me just read to you. They say that the frustration over what they saw as abandonment by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's divisive right-wing government, whose hostile policy towards Palestinians is accused of undermining Israel's security. Quote, he needs to say, I'm sorry, I failed you. It's because of me and my pride you were almost murdered, said Cherry, a 45-year-old Belgian-Israeli health economist. Porterman and Cherry described how they shut themselves in safe rooms on the morning of the attack and hunkered down for 12 hours, waiting for the Israel Defense Force to come to their rescue. Over those excruciating hours, rockets flew overhead and Hamas raided homes across the kibbutz shouting Allah Akbar and massacred the Jews. Porterman, who until last week worked as an after-school teacher, sent what he believed would be his last Facebook post from his safe room, quote, half an hour, we're locked up with terrorists at home, no one comes. The 40-year-old said he sent the message as he stood next to the safe room door holding an axe, while his wife Maria had their 7-month-old baby girl in one hand and a knife in the other. Neither of them expected to survive, but a latch installed on the inside of the door by a previous tenant prevented the terrorists from bursting in. In a separate safe room, Cherry, her husband Oren, and their 3 children barricaded the door as best as they could with a cupboard and a chair. The reasons for such a spectacular security lapse in the nation that prides itself on its intelligence apparatus is still unclear and a huge embarrassment for Netanyahu's administration. So they're saying that they go back to say that they're not going to go back to the kibbutz. They don't think that the government has the ability to protect them. They said that they feel abandoned by the government. They said, with the Netanyahu government, I will take them out of the Knesset myself with my own hands. I will do that. I already started organizing a whole lot of people from the area that have been abandoned and want to do just that very thing. Similarly, Cherry said she isn't able to sleep worrying about what could have happened to her family. And it's just absolutely terrifying. She says that she told her son that half of his classmates won't be coming back to school because they were killed. This is terrible. She says that the antagonism of Netanyahu towards Palestinians, the prime minister is allied with far-right parties and his national security minister has convictions for anti-Arab racism. 2 days before the attack, Porterman complained a man from the religious Zionist party constructed a hut in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. The move was a PR stunt to fool the people of Israel that we are the landlords and we could do whatever we want. So they're going on and saying that, this is the account of people that were in these safe rooms. Children were slaughtered in the kibbutz that they were living in. They were absolutely terrified. And they say that the culprit is Netanyahu because Netanyahu and his far-right racist government has not come to a political solution with the Palestinians, but instead antagonized them. So they recognize that it was the antagonizing that led to this, that led to, when you antagonize and you make them very angry and hateful, and that is something that Netanyahu has done. So that is one piece that has come out. There's many, many pieces on this. Even Trump has mentioned that Netanyahu is done. Here's another one from Haaretz. This is an Israeli newspaper saying even Netanyahu loyalists are turning their backs. After the war, he has to go, they said. Netanyahu forced us to form a government of the far right, which created a rift in the nation and divided large parts of the population. The taxpayers and the ones who serve in the army were excluded. The Likud grassroots abhors extremism and extremists, a Likud official said. So they're saying everyone is very angry at Netanyahu. That's mainly due to his policies over the years, a very cowardly policy that sought to postpone the inevitable and avoid operations. So this is coming from the right-wing side. So the other one, those are people that were in the kibbutz. They were under attack, and they're saying he didn't protect us. Our government abandoned us. We hunkered down for 12 hours. There was no IDF that came for us. They claimed we were super secure. We were not. And all of this is because they antagonized the Palestinians. They made them angry. They pissed them off. They made them hate us, and they came around saying we want to kill you all. So they're blaming Netanyahu. This group, from this article, they're going and they're talking to Likud insiders. This is a very right-wing party, and so this is their perspective of why they're done with Netanyahu. And they say that everyone is very angry at Netanyahu. That's mainly due to his policies over the year, a very cowardly policy that sought to postpone the inevitable and avoid operations like occupying the Gaza Strip, demilitarizing it, and then transferring control to the Palestinian Authority. So they're saying they didn't want to take the Gaza Strip. What they're wanting for Hamas to be wiped out, and then for the politics to go back to the Palestinian Authority, which is who controls the West Bank. So the Palestinians are divided in their governments. The West Bank is with the Palestinian Authority, Gaza's with Hamas, and then, of course, there's Israel in the middle. So they're saying now we're paying for that tenfold. There's also a lot of anger over Netanyahu's relying on people like Itamar Ben-Gvir and all of his nonsense, of very right-wing, racist people. It says Netanyahu forced us to form a government of the far right, which created a rift in the nation, saying that the Likud grassroots today abhors extremism and extremists. They go on to say that Netanyahu thinks he's going to be able to escape responsibility for the most horrific failure, but that's not going to happen. So the government's fate was sealed on October 7th, and that of Likud was on the Black Sabbath. What was is no longer. Those who try to evade responsibility only make their situation worse. The Israeli public is feeling a holy rage, the likes of which was never felt until was felt after the Yom Kippur War. They're saying that what they're really pissed off about is that he allowed Qatar to fund Hamas, and that his whole reasoning for funding Hamas was, he said that we're doing this in order to divide the Palestinians. So if you're for a one Israel state, if you're for a Jewish nation without the Palestinians, then you need to be with me on funding Hamas, on creating Hamas, on fueling them in the West Bank, and keeping the Palestinian Authority out of Gaza. You do this so that we can divide and conquer. That was his stated plan, outwardly, openly, and the people are really pissed about it. So even the insiders, they're mad. They're saying this wasn't a working situation. He got us into this mess. He convinced us into forming Hamas and making the radicals in Gaza, because Netanyahu's largest worry was the Palestinian Authority, because they wanted to have a peace agreement for a two-state solution. And many in the far-right government and many of the people in Israel do not want to see that. They want to see a whole Israel without a Palestine in that region. And they view the Palestinian Authority as a threat to that desire, because they are afraid of a two-state solution they want a one-state solution. They just want that one state to be Jewish only and no Arabs in that state. Or the Arabs can be there, but as a minority, they can stick around and, in very small minorities without having any actual power. So there's a lot of ire towards Netanyahu, and it's a very important thing for us to point out because if they're saying over and over to him, "You're finished as soon as this war is over," the war is never going to be over. That's the unfortunate reality of that. So, something to keep our eyes on as Biden says we're giving a bunch of money to Ukraine, we're giving a bunch of money to Israel. There's also a question on whether or not Zelensky is going to actually hold an election and transfer power to another person, this liberal democracy that we're supposedly fighting for. That's the other thing is you could be consistent in the viewpoint of saying that you're fighting for a liberal democracy, but it really needs to be a liberal democracy. And the problem is with Ukraine, it's not. We know it's a very corrupt country. There's questions on whether or not they're even going to hold elections. They've suspended elections, which is not a liberal democracy. Same thing with Israel under Netanyahu's government. It is not a liberal democracy. It is a country that is trying openly to rip the rights away of other people, to rip the rights away from the judiciary, from allowing for a peaceful two-state solution. You know, this is not a liberal democracy. So when we say we're fighting for a liberal democracy, I think it's fair to be consistent in that, but you've got to then dig deeper and ensure that you're truly consistent in that viewpoint. And that is not what is going on with our government. They're just saying these are liberal democracies. They're telling us that they are, but they're not actually. And that is a giant problem in the argument of why we're spending tons of money and why we're allowing people to sacrifice their lives rather than encouraging peace agreements. If we were truly a wonderful country that fought for freedom and self-determination and independence, we would be a country of peace. We would be a country that wants to bring peace to all people. And the one thing when it comes to independence and freedom and self-determination, you can't have any of that if you're dead. And that is something that should be very sobering to all of us, that all of these hundreds of thousands of lives that have been lost in these wars just of this last year between Ukraine and now what's going on in Israel and Gaza. You can't have any of those freedoms or liberal democracies or independence or any of that if you're living, if you're not alive, if you're dead, if you've been killed by war. So we should be calling for peace. All people should be living in peace. And it's going to be growing pains, I think, for Israel and Palestine for sure. If they were to truly come to a peace agreement and have a ceasefire, there would be growing pains. But I think that all people at the end of the day want to live, and people at the end of the day want to have prosperity for themselves and their families. And they won't rise up and cause terrorist acts or harm to each other if they're given that opportunity, if they're afforded that opportunity. I think it's very important. All right, guys, that is it for tonight's show. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate you watching. We will be back tomorrow night with another great show. We are going to be talking to Dan Cohen, journalist Dan Cohen, tomorrow night. Dan is a Jewish American who lived in Palestine for 3 years in various parts of Palestine, throughout the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and even 7 months living in Gaza as a Jewish American journalist. So we're going to get his perspective. It's going to be very interesting since he's got that unique perspective on the entire conflict. And I think it'll be a great conversation. You'll definitely want to join us tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. Until then, guys, we will see you. Have a good one. Good night.